Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brody Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's episode of A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and unlike most of my shows where I interview health experts or people who have had transformational stories worth sharing, it's just me today. Part of that is that I have been traveling. My husband and I were just dropping off our daughter for her first year of college at the University of British Columbia, and then spent a week on Orcas Island, which was wonderful, R&R, and then went to a friend's wedding in Seattle. And then, of course, getting back into the clinic, transitioning office managers, saying goodbye to Megan, who's been amazing, and welcome to Erin. And also just having to see more patients than usual to make up for being gone. It's been hard to get on my schedule as a guest. And so even though I have 6 interviews lined up this week for future episodes of Healthy Curiosity, I don't have any of that ready yet in time for our usual Wednesday new episode launch. So rather than rerunning an old episode, I thought I would use the show today to demystify one aspect of Chinese medicine that I get asked about almost every new patient visit. And that is, what are you looking at when you look at my tongue? Figured actually this is a topic that could be potentially useful for everyone to understand a little bit about how to read your tongue, what your tongue might be telling you about the functioning of your internal organs, and what to do about it. So that's going to be what I dive into as a little bit of an intro class on tongue diagnosis. But first, I have a couple of announcements. If you've been listening to the show for a while, no doubt you've heard a promo for my group coaching program, Level Up. And that's basically my self-care boot camp or self-care support group, depending on how you want to think about it, designed for people who are really ready to make a change in up-leveling their eating habits or their exercise plan, or really evolving their identity in ways where there's not necessarily a whole lot of people in your own immediate community who are interested in doing the same things, at taking that step to finally bring a meditation practice online, or finally ditch sugar, or finally whatever it is that you're wanting to do. If you could use some help with that, there are 4 spots left at this point. And in the promo, I've been saying that I've been running all summer, I've been saying that it starts in September, and it doesn't. It starts in October. Starts October 10th, and there are 4 spots left. So if you are interested in potentially joining this amazing community of people who are raising their own bar and becoming the person that they used to be jealous of, then I would encourage you to hop on the phone with me, schedule a discovery call. So go to brodywelch.com, go to the Level Up page, and then click schedule a discovery call, and we can see if you're a good fit or not. If you are interested in information from me and not so much implementation, I'm also going to be launching my Basics of Chinese Medicine course this fall as well on October 18th. I know that people in the business world say that you shouldn't launch more than one thing at once because people will get confused and then not do anything. But maybe it's from being in school for 27 years straight in my life. But the idea of fall, back to school time, to me, it's you should have options about what you want to learn and what you want to enrich yourself with next. And so I figure there's really no harm in running both of those things at the same time. Basics of Chinese Medicine is a course that I developed that basically distills everything that you would learn as a first-year acupuncture student, minus all of the point location and the anatomy and physiology and things like that. But just the Chinese medical theory stuff, yin and yang, qi, the 5 elements, the mental emotional connections, plus a handful of acupoints, how to use them, essential oils that you can put on those acupoints, all sorts of really fun stuff. That's an 8-week course, and that starts October 18th. So if those are interesting, go to my website. You can sign up. Should be activated now. And we're going to, without further ado, go into some tongue diagnosis. So when you visit an acupuncturist, the methods of diagnosis that it typically that you'll experience is your acupuncturist will likely ask you the 10,000 questions, and we'll get a sense of everything that's going on in all the different systems of your body. And then we do a visual assessment. So we're looking at the color of your of your face and your complexion and like the shininess of your hair and the health of your fingernails and how you carry yourself and the shine in your eyes and the spirit behind your words. And like, so there's all this sort of listening and looking that we do. And then we examine the tongue and the pulse. And the pulse we take at 3 different positions at 3 different depths. And that tells us about what's going on with the different organ systems in the body. And the tongue is like a little map of the body, which I'm going to walk you through. And then we also might palpate points and find out if they're tender and if they correspond with particular organ systems. That can also give us information about the body. So the tongue is one very useful way that we make a diagnosis in Chinese medicine. But I definitely want to start this episode with the caveat that whatever you see on your tongue is not 100% of the truth of what's going on in your body, because there's all these other ways that information could be showing up. And also the tongue, it changes over a fairly long time scale. So whereas the pulse might change from moment to moment, depending on what you're thinking about or the state of your nervous system, the pulse is going to take weeks, if not months, to change. And so if you have had habits for 10 years that you no longer have, the tongue might still be bearing some marks of that lived experience. And so it's the kind of thing that takes a little bit longer to change, or a lot longer to change. And that is not necessarily going to be 100% accurate as far as a standalone diagnostic tool, because it's just one of the many ways that we make a diagnosis from a Chinese medicine perspective. However, there is plenty that your tongue can tell you just by taking a look at it, and especially looking at it day after day and just really kind of having a dialogue with your tongue. So when an acupuncturist looks at your tongue, we're looking at it as a representation of the entire ecosystem that is you. We're looking at the shape, the color, the coating, and the moisture for the most part. And each of these things tells us a little bit about what's going on and also where it's going on. So if you can imagine that the tip of your tongue corresponds with the heart, that a little half circle around the tip of your tongue is going to correspond with the lungs. The sides of the tongue correlate with the liver and gallbladder. The center of your tongue, just behind the tip, is going to go with the stomach and spleen. Behind that, small intestine and large intestine. And at the very root of the tongue, the kidney, bladder, and reproductive organs. So essentially, it's basically like the upper part of the body is in the front and the lower part of the body is in the back. So if we see one part of the tongue is a lot more red than the rest, that's going to indicate that there's heat in that part of the body, more so than in any other place. So, for example, redness on the sides of the tongue would indicate heat in the liver. And so that would lead a practitioner down the road of wondering, well, is this person drinking too much alcohol, or are they exposed to a toxic chemical that is perhaps inhibiting them from feeling well? Like, what's going on that the liver is harboring all this heat, whereas the rest of the tongue is a more pale red color. So it's hard to talk about color. So, but basically the pale red is the standard what a tongue should look like. It should be pale red in color, like a baby's tongue, if you can imagine that. If the tongue looks pale or kind of whitish or not quite a full pale red, you might be blood deficient. You might be lacking in just the red stuff that runs in your veins. You might not necessarily be anemic, but if you notice that you are tired frequently, or tired after exercise, or that your periods are really scanty, or that you're dizzy when you stand up, that a pale tongue would also confirm this diagnosis of blood deficiency. In Chinese medicine, blood with a capital B is not just the red stuff that runs in your veins, but it's that which moistens and nourishes the body. So if you're also dealing with dryness or a lack of flexibility in your muscles, muscle cramping, dry eyes, or blurred vision, we might also suspect blood deficiency and confirm that if the tongue looks a little bit pale. I already mentioned red is a sign of internal heat. A lot of times we'll see redness at the tip of the tongue in situations where someone's been stressed for a long time. That's the heart is at the tip of the tongue. And in Chinese medicine, the heart is not just the physical heart, but it's the emotional center and the mental center of the body. So chronic stress that is perhaps manifesting as anxiety or insomnia, palpitations, we might see redness at the tip of the tongue. And just to the sides of the tip of the tongue, or just kind of behind the tip of the tongue in the lung area, we often see redness there when someone is dealing with perhaps an acute sore throat or upper respiratory issue, like a heat pathogen has entered the lungs. Or we sometimes see that in situations like asthma, where the person has a chronic lung condition that is a result of too much heat. So if someone's a smoker, we would often see redness in the lung area, along with a greasy yellow tongue coating. So there's like a bunch of this crud left over that the body's like, what do I do with this? And that's essentially what we consider phlegm or dampness. The indicator on the tongue is the greasy coat. That's a sign of residue that the body can't totally fully process. And so it's basically toxicity hanging out and gunking up the works. So we've covered pale, we've covered normal, we've covered red. Purple is another tongue color that we often see, and purple is usually indicative of stagnation. So purple spots could be that blood is stagnating, not flowing well in a given area. Or an overall purple tongue similarly can be stagnation, usually of blood itself. And so we'll see this a lot with, if you look underneath the tongue, if you have kind of like purple distended veins underneath there, that's usually a sign of some gynecological stagnation. And so like needing to get the blood flowing in the reproductive system. Purple is basically a sign that blood needs to be invigorated, and usually it doesn't get that way overnight. Usually that has been building for a long time, and usually chi stagnation, or like the movement of energy freely in the body, needs to be addressed in order for the blood to move freely. So those are mainly the colors of the body. Then we can look at the coat. And generally speaking, a healthy tongue does indeed have a little bit of a coat on it, this thin layer of fur or slime on the tongue that should be thin enough that you can see what color the tongue is underneath it. That's kind of the definition of a thin coat, where you can see that there is some moisture, there's something there, and that you can still see whatever the tongue body color is underneath. So a thin white coat is very normal. If the tongue does not have any coat at all, generally speaking, some heat has burned off that coat. Usually we think of that as yin deficiency, that there isn't enough stomach yin to manifest as the tongue fur. It's very common to see a tongue without a coat, for example, in women going through menopause who are dealing with a lot of lack of yin, like they're burning up at night, they're having night sweats and hot flashes, they don't have enough coolant in the system. And so that if we see that on a tongue, we confirm that we need to be nourishing the yin with herbs and with diet and with lifestyle. So the tongue coat could be absent, or it could be thick. It could be on the greasy side or on the thick side. And that, as I mentioned just a second ago, is the body hanging on to residue that we call dampness. So things that are in the way. So typically this is coming from diet. So it could be that two things are happening. One, you are eating the cleanest diet in the whole wide world, and your digestive organs are simply not totally like in awesome, amazing tuned shape to be able to fully process the nectar of the gods that you're giving your system. And in that case, it's going to be really important for you to be boosting your digestive fire, your Agni, as we call it in Ayurveda, or your spleen chi, as we call it in Chinese medicine. Two go-to herbs for boosting digestive fire are going to be fresh ginger and black pepper. Also, the point stomach 36, fantastic for helping with digestive issues of all kinds. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But for quick and easy reference, basically if you hold your hand with your fingers together and you put it just below your kneecap and you go one index finger's width to the outside of the crest of the tibia, the very top part of that bone in the very front of the leg, that's stomach 36. And rubbing on that every day can be a great way to just strengthen the chi of your digestive system. The other thing that could be going on if you've got too thick of a coat on your tongue is that you're simply eating too much of something that your body doesn't appreciate or doesn't want. So it could be too much dairy or too much sugar or too much refined flour or too much heavy animal protein, or like just that there can be all kinds of things. But essentially it's a sign that you need to clean up your diet a little bit so that your digestive fire is strong enough to handle what you're giving it. And generally speaking, the easiest place to start is to anything that's not found in nature, where the body is going to not quite know what to do with those molecules, is going to be the easiest way to make your system less damp overall. So if you've got the thick, greasy coat, and the easiest way to determine that is with a tongue scraper. I definitely recommend that everybody own a tongue scraper. This is like an investment of under $10 that will last you the rest of your life. And I'll also put a link to that in the show notes. Basically, if you just take a moment and scrape your tongue a few times in the morning, this will get the bacteria off of your tongue. It will, in a way that doesn't just hang out on your toothbrush. You can see the gunk that's coming off, the thickness of it, the color of it. Get really intimate with your tongue coat. And some benefits are going to include having fresher breath, having more intelligent cravings as your tongue is able to taste better, and not be influenced by the thing that you just ate or the memory of something that you've tasted recently, as well as giving a gentle sort of shadow massage to your internal organs. As you run the tongue scraper over your tongue, it's kind of like a reflexology massage for your internal organs. So it's the kind of habit that takes less than 30 seconds to do, and that can make a massive difference in how in tune you are with your digestive system. Okay, so we've covered the coat, covered the color, the shape. The most common shapes that we see with the tongue, there can be cracks and divots in the tongue, which can be deficiencies. Usually we'll see like a center crack, and in Chinese medicine, that can mean a malabsorption issue, and divots or cracks that go horizontally can be that the yin is being depleted. It's sort of a classic thing. The other thing is scallops. Like if you look at the edge of the tongue and it looks like there are teeth marks around the outside, that's because the tongue is swollen. Again, dampness is an issue there. And that the effect of your teeth on the edge of your tongue can make it look a little bit like a scalloped seashell. And that is definitely, or most often, a sign of dampness. And the aforementioned dietary cleanup is advised. Another way to think about dampness is kind of like the body has too much moisture, like too much water that it can't really use, much in the way that a stagnant pond does not give rise to a thriving ecosystem. If you just have liquid hanging out in the body it's not being metabolized well, it's not being utilized well, or it could be of poor quality, then it's going to throw things off. So if the tongue is wet, that could be a sign that your body is deficient in yang, deficient in the warming, activating, transformative energy that we need. So looking at whether the tongue surface is wet or dry or just kind of moist. It should be just kind of in the middle of moisture. If it looks sopping wet, then yeah, we're going to look at, is there a yang deficiency pattern here going on? Also, if the tongue is blue, that can indicate that there's cold in the system and not enough warmth, not enough of this energy of vitality that's required for transforming things. And because indeed digestion itself is a fiery transformative process that takes energy. So looking at the moisture, again, if it's dry, that indicates usually dryness in the ecosystem as a whole. And that could be not only because of dehydration or something like that, but a deficiency of that which is moistening and nourishing. So again, deficiency of yin, deficiency of blood, or deficiency of fluids in general. So all of these terms that I'm using, like dampness or heat or blood deficiency or yin deficiency, yang deficiency, these are not things that I expect you to totally understand at the moment. They are simply a window into the world of Chinese medicine diagnostics. That said, if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, you could be a great candidate for the Basics of Chinese Medicine course, which I invite you to check out at brodywelch.com. And similarly, if you're looking at your tongue and saying, yeah, like I know that I have a greasy coat on my tongue because I know I'm eating too much sugar, or I know that I need to make some dietary changes, but I've tried and I haven't been able to do that on my own, you could be a great candidate for Level Up. So hop on the phone with me. I would love to hear from you. And if you're just wanting to take in this information and make use of it in your daily life, here's what I would encourage you to do. Number one is get a tongue scraper and use it every morning after you brush your teeth. Just a few passes over the surface of your tongue is all it takes. And then take a moment and just look at your tongue. And if you want to write it down and make notes of what you see and where, that could also be really interesting in terms of getting some feedback about what you're doing differently in your life and how that can show up differently on your tongue. One thing I will say is that stress doesn't necessarily show up on the tongue like on a day-to-day basis. If you're just dealing with chi stagnation, it's not necessarily going to show in the tongue body. It's only when like that chi stagnation is pent up and turns into heat that you'll sometimes see it in the form of redness. So just a caveat there that like if stress is your main issue, pulse diagnosis or just looking at the rest of your life might be more informative than looking at your tongue. So that's it for our mini tongue diagnosis class for the day. If you know of anybody who you think would be really interested in this, I'd love for you to share this episode or really any episode that you hear, because that is what helps grow the podcast. And to be honest, the podcast really needs to grow in order to stay alive. It takes a lot of time and money to produce the show every week, and I love doing it. And I love hearing how it's helping you or the people who walk in on you as you're listening to the podcast. That feels awesome. And at the same time, I would love your help in getting all this information into the ears and minds of the people who could really benefit from these kinds of conversations. So thanks in advance for sharing the show, for reviewing and rating it in iTunes, and for heading over to brodywelch.com and getting curious about ways in which we can work together. If you've got a potential idea for a future topic that you'd love for me to talk about or interview somebody about, I would love to know what your questions are, what you're most stuck on, or what you could use some support with. Feel free to email me at brody@brodywelch.com. I hope you have a wonderful week, and thanks so much for listening. Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodywelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.